Today, our CPG Professional Networks is hosting another webinar under our theme of professional development for CPG professionals. And we have Bonnie Mezger with us, and Bonnie has done a series of webinars. Hopefully you can go online and see some of the recorded webinars. There is a series of topics, and as Bonnie will probably share throughout her discussion this afternoon, there's a theme and a consistent sort of thoughtfulness throughout all of the sessions that we've done thus far with Bonnie. So I'm Perry Scholes. I'm president and founder of CPG Professional Networks. We are an organization dedicated to professional development, talent development, consultants, and sort of creating a diverse network within the CPG industry. And so under our professional development umbrella, one of the four key areas is doing webinars. And today we have our speaker, Bonnie, who is going to take you through the 3R's: reality, resonance, and resilience. So without any further delay, I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie. Bonnie, thank you again for being here and all the work you do to prepare to deliver these sessions for us.
Well, thanks so much, Perry. And it's really great to be back again. I really enjoy doing this. So as Perry said, I'm Bonnie Mezger, and I spent a little over 20 years with Kraft Foods Global. Really grew up there and got a solid foundation for my career. And then later I spent about 9 years in the aerospace sector, and all combined have over 20 years of experience with organizational development, org effectiveness, and a big focus recently on leadership and team development and coaching. So a lot of my webinars really have to do with helping leaders and subsequently the teams that they lead to develop and improve. So my topic, the 3R's: reality, resonance, and resilience. With the key question is, might it be time for you to think about your own recharging? So let's get into it. The objectives for today, as usual, are we're going to look at some of the meanings and relevance of these words and these ideas. We'll also explore some of the underlying science and processes behind them. And I always like to end with some specific actions and steps that you can take or consider for your own ongoing development. Some of the key concepts we'll look at are fatigue and stress and burnout. And then there's a cycle of sacrifice and renewal. We'll actually look at that in a little bit of detail. And then I'll spend quite a good chunk of time with teasing apart the elements of resilience. You know, we all know about resilience in general, but what is it really comprised of so that we can actually do something to help ourselves improve with our resilience. And then finally, I'll end with the idea of resonance, as specifically as a leader, as well as some personal things that we can all do to really think about becoming more resonant. And I just want to say that the concepts and ideas in this, I pulled from reading over 30 articles that have been recently published in the likes of Harvard Business Review, Center for Creative Leadership, and some other business sources. And I've included in the handout, which will be posted on CPG website, I've included the full list of references and resources so that if you want to dig into any more specific ones yourself, you'd be more than welcome to do that. So I'm trying to synthesize of these 30 articles, synthesize some of the key ideas from all of them. I'm going to actually tie this back to our last webinar, which was about change and disruption. So you might remember some of these slides if you were on that webinar. The fact that change is all around us in many different aspects, and that it's really an era of disruption. And of course, we hear that word used an awful lot lately, that we feel like so many things are in a state of disruption. And we've looked at these terms, the VUCA and the RUPT, which are acronyms for all these words that relate to the uncertainty in the changing world and the experience of turbulence. We also looked at the idea of change fatigue, or change saturation, some places call it, when we just get exhausted from being faced with too many changes at once sometimes. And that the change saturation can occur at all these different levels, all the way stemming from individual difficulties all the way to organizations that don't meet their goals. So we ended that with, if we can accept that change is the new structural reality, then we can begin a new set of strategies to put things right. And so I ended that webinar with this call to action for you to think or ask yourself, what are you doing now to adapt or even create your new reality? And that led me to think, well, how do we do this? I mean, even asking this of myself, how do I adapt or create my new reality? And that led to this webinar with the 3 key ideas of how-to being, first of all, starting with an awareness of our reality, our current state, and then figuring out how we can build resilience and practice resonance. And those combined can actually help us with the important aspect of recharging and renewing ourselves. So a lot of these concepts probably won't be brand new to you, but my hope is that I'm going to offer you a framework so that you can think about it within this framework and give you some more concrete steps and actions that you can take to help yourself going forward, when and how you might need it. So let's start with reality. There's some variations of what we might be going through, starting with the 3 key ideas here being pressure, stress, and burnout. So from the articles that I read, pressure is merely a demand to perform. And when we sense that a time is a finite resource, that's when the pressure starts to feel stronger. Inherently, there's no initial stress within pressure, but the stress comes from how we respond to it, especially, for example, when we start to feel that time is shrinking in on us, we might feel more and more stressed from the pressures to get things done, etc. And within stress, we might start to ruminate, meaning we might worry, we might regret some things we didn't do before, or we might worry about what's coming in the future. We might ask ourselves or force ourselves to work harder, to work longer, possibly thinking that multitasking is going to be helpful to us, and all of that can add more pressure. And then finally, we can end up realizing we've drained our energy, or we're getting into a state of mind that might make us more anxious, more impatient, maybe more irritable or insecure. And those states are a normal, natural outcome of having the stress building up. And then that can then build up to a state of burnout. And that is when the demands that we face and the stresses we experience are starting to literally outstrip our resources to meet them. And this is called burnout is often a lagging indicator of chronic stress. And we can experience emotional exhaustion, where we just basically feel used up, or depersonalization, when we start to feel alienated or possibly even cynical towards our job or the people around us. And that can trap us into situations where we start to suffer, and then the cycle starts. And then we actually have a reduced capacity to perform. I don't know if any of you have experienced that, and hopefully not too often, but it does happen sometimes. And I'd like to ask you, if you'd like to, this is just an open offer. We're not going to be using the text phone feature today. Instead, I'm just going to invite you, if you'd like to type your answer in the chat space to this question of, what have you experienced recently? Any of these? Have you experienced pressure, stress, burnout, all of them, none of them? So if you'd like to go ahead and type in the chat now, that would be fine. Okay. Okay, great. I see a couple coming in here. People experiencing pressure and then experiencing the stress that stems from that pressure, of course, which is how we're experiencing it. So it's normal and natural to feel these things as our work demands and as our life. In fact, it's not just limited to work, obviously. It can be in our personal life and in our social community life as well when things mount up on us. So here's a set of questions. You don't need to answer these by chat, but just something for you to think about to help sort of take your temperature of your reality. Do you find yourself working harder with less result, maybe feeling tired even after you sleep, finding less time for enjoyment or difficulty talking about what's going on? How's your exercise doing? Are you taking care of yourself? And are you having fun and smiling and laughing? Or are you experiencing some aches and pains? And then at sort of the other end, final end of the spectrum, are you starting to feel really down, like nothing matters, or overwhelmed or burdened? So these questions are just some indicators that if you answer yes to a lot of these questions, obviously that's telling you something and you need to pay attention to it. And if you think that you might be even approaching burnout, that usually doesn't cure itself by time. It's going to require that you pay attention and that you do something to help yourself. And it doesn't have to be major. You can start to do some small steps. And that's what we'll actually look at today. I also want to mention that on the CPG website after this webinar, there will be some handouts, a couple of handouts posted. One of them will have a longer set of questions that you can do a self-assessment for yourself around your current state in how your energy is the current state of your energy. So it's questions similar to this. So you can look for that. What those questions would indicate, if you answered yes or to many of them, it could indicate that you're in what's called the sacrifice syndrome. And this work stemmed from some research by Richard Boyatzis and Annie McKee. And it's from their book on leadership resonance. And let me just walk through this. So when you're in the sacrifice syndrome, it starts over here on the left top box. The sacrifice of being a leader causes stress. So it's not always bad stress. It can be very good stress. You can have a lot going on. And let me also just say that the word leader is generic here. It's really in any position of responsibility. It doesn't have to do with title per se. So you can be a leader in your family. You can be a leader in community groups. So just whenever you have responsibility, that's when you're a leader. And there are stresses associated with that. Like I said, some can be very good, but it can be a lot going on. And then you can also encounter things that don't go well, and that it can add stress. What stress does when we experience it in this model is that it arouses what's the sympathetic nervous system, and that in turn activates hormones, a couple different kinds of hormones here. And I'm not an expert in this, but I did go to some seminars and learned the cycle, and you can certainly read about it in Boyatzis' articles and book. So these hormones have the impact of these physiological results in our body, that our blood pressure can increase, large muscles prepare to fight or flight, our brain can start to shut down the non-essential neural circuits, and then we can be less open, flexible, and creative because we're getting more and more focused on the object of our stress. The corticosteroids can lead to a reduction in our immune system, so make us more vulnerable to illness perhaps. And then in our brain, it can have an effect on the neurons, such as inhibiting creation of new ones or overstimulating older ones and leading to some shrinkage. So the culminating results of this, if we're in this sacrifice syndrome over and over for too long, is that our brain can actually start losing our capacity to learn. We realize we feel anxious, nervous, even depressed. We might start to perceive things that otherwise we wouldn't react to, but we might think that now people are being threatening or negative, and that can actually arouse more stress, which, as you can see, would loop around and come back to the beginning and get us caught in this cycle of sacrifice. So let's zoom out a minute and see where this cycle of sacrifice fits in the bigger picture. I'm looking over here now. I've got my cursor on the right side. What we just talked about, what I just described, is the sacrifice syndrome, all of those physiological things happening. But notice at the very top here of the right side, we started out being an effective leader. But then we encountered pushing too hard, maybe too often, maybe others are pushing us, or maybe we're pushing ourselves over and over again. Maybe we encounter a big crisis or a series of little crises, and maybe we encounter things that feel like threats, actual or perceived threats. When that happens over and over and we're in this sacrifice syndrome, that can take our effective leadership and end up getting us towards more and more ineffective or unsustainable leadership. And what this model says is what we need to try to do is go over this yellow bridge here in the middle, help ourselves getting over to the I almost said recycle, to the cycle of renewal. And that we're going to talk about later in the webinar. But for now, let me just say that it has to do with having resonant relationships, the state of being mindful, hopeful, and compassionate. And you can see from all these little black arrows here that they're all interconnected. It's really setting your brain up in a loop of resonance through doing these kinds of practices, mindfulness, hope, and compassion. And ultimately, when we can do that often enough and cycle through that enough, that can strengthen our ability to be effective and a more sustainable leadership. And again, we'll come back to that. The question that I ask myself is, it's not always so easy going over this yellow arrow, this bridge from sacrifice to renewal. So what is that all about, and how can we do that? And I would suggest that this is where the idea of resilience fits in. Resilience can serve as the bridge from sacrifice to renewal, or at least it's one way to get there. So now I'd like to spend some time teasing apart resilience and looking at it more closely. So what is it? In the various articles I read, the simplest description is that resilience is the ability to bounce back from adversity or difficulties. We all pretty much know that already. It's what allows us to recover from change. Notice the word change there, from change or hardship or too much stress. So it's a recovery vehicle. Some articles described it as a super skill. And in a combination of what I read, these are the points that make up a highly resilient person is someone who has a staunch acceptance of reality, an underlying belief in the meaning and meaningfulness and values of their life, a belief in themselves and often something larger than self, and that they demonstrate flexibility, durability, and openness to learning. They have a sense of positivity and optimism. I'll say more about that later. It's not blind optimism. It's optimism founded on reality. And then they also have an uncanny ability to improvise, basically making do with what they have in the moment, kind of the MacGyver effect, I would say. So I thought this was an interesting quote from the World Health Organization, that stress is the global health epidemic of the 21st century. They went on to say, it's more important now than ever to build resilient skills to effectively navigate life. So in the broad sense of things, resilience really does matter. It's also a business issue. So it's not just a hot, trendy topic that the various magazines and blogs like to talk about for no reason. There is a reason that resilience, because change happens in the workplace so often now, and sometimes to so much depth and breadth, resilience gives us the capacity to be robust. So it really is important for business. And we all have probably experienced some leaders one time or another who were not resilient, and they may have been caught in that cycle, the sacrifice cycle themselves. And they tend to be more anxious and reactive, possibly even angry. And we know what that does is that it sets the tone for others who are on their teams or even just associated in the organization with them. And it can have a ripple effect where other people then are more vulnerable, they become less motivated or overwhelmed by the anxiety or the fast pace. And that can actually have a tangible effect of more illness or absenteeism. There was the PricewaterhouseCoopers in 2014 that looked at the return on investment of programs that attempted to build resilience. So what they found was that these programs that were successful, that fostered a resilient and more mentally healthy workplace, actually did have a high return on investment of $2.30 for every dollar spent. And this was measured in terms of lower healthcare costs, higher productivity, lower absenteeism, and decreased turnover. So resiliency really does matter, more than just for ourselves, but also for business. And again, like all of our other skills, this is the good news. We can train our brain to be more resilient. It does take practice and attention, but we can learn it starting by modifying our thoughts and our actions. So by doing this, what we do is we begin to recognize our patterns. And that just comes from a state of just starting to notice yourself. Notice when you get anxious, and notice when you start to have reactions to stress. And then start to help yourself form new responses, new perspectives. I'll talk about this. Really refrain from blaming yourself. That doesn't help. That just adds to it. In knowing that you need to be the one to take the initiative and the responsibility. No one's going to do it for you. And then, of course, like any new habit, you need to practice, practice, practice. And that will, over time, create the new neural pathways that will be able to help you. So one article said the key to resilience is simply trying really hard, then stopping, recovering, and trying again. And that's much like the cycle of sacrifice and renewal that we saw, that you will go into those times when it's hard and you feel used up, but you need to stop and recover and go into renewal, and then you can try again. So none of this is static. And likewise, it's based on biology with this idea of homeostasis. That's not static either. That's the concept where the brain continuously restores itself to sustain well-being. But it won't do it by itself. We have to help it out. Yeah, and if we don't, we can certainly get stuck in the burnout phase. And anyone who's been there knows that it's definitely not fun. All right, so let's look at, we're going to break apart resilience into these are 8 segments or elements of resilience that were very common themes throughout many of these articles. So I synthesize it into these main 8 aspects: accept reality, reflect, reframe, your sense of purpose or your spiritual well-being, and then your physical, mental, emotional, and social aspects. And you can think about those as the well-being status of yourself. And you'll notice down in the lower right corner, I put the word breathe. Breathing is so important, and it permeates all of these. It's sort of like the glue that can go in and out of any one of these aspects. And your breathing is something you always should be able to have control over, of course, unless if you just ran a sprint. But normally in your natural state, you can control your breathing, and to remember to just take some deep breaths. Sometimes that is just so renewing just in and of itself. So here we go. Accept reality. We'll go through each of these quickly. In accepting reality, first and foremost, accepting change, to be more comfortable with change, recognizing that it's constant and inevitable. And then I mentioned earlier the idea of optimism, that it's grounded in reality. And that's very true, to be realistically optimistic. So what we're not saying is in a disaster to think about only rosy colored things. We're saying that we want to keep reality not distorted. So having a clear handle on reality, but then using the idea of what can we do to make the best of the circumstances we're facing, even if they might be very grim or dire. What can we do to help ourselves in the most optimistic, realistic way? And then doing a reality check. Obviously we know in life sometimes things do go wrong, and sometimes it does take longer than expected, and that tasks can be very, very challenging. So we need to think about and take charge of how we think about adversity. And really try to catch yourself if you ever find yourself going into denial as a way to cope. I mean, it can be helpful in the moment, but if you get stuck in the state of denial, not going to be helpful for you. So try to be aware and avoid that when you can. And finally, creating a healthy relationship with the idea of control. It's that old saying, what's in your control? Focus on the things you have control over, and realize the things you don't have control over, and know the difference. And then you always have control over how you interpret and respond. That is something you can control. So that's part of accepting reality. Reflecting and not ruminating. That's the second aspect. Rumination is when we get stuck in regretting, going over and over and over things that happened in the past with a sense of regret, and not really doing anything about it, just feeling regretful and feeling bad. Or we see what's coming up, or we imagine what's coming in the future, and we have fears about it. And we go over that in our mind. We've probably all experienced this in those times when you wake up in the middle of the night. This would be ruminating. And, maybe a little can help you get aware, but over and over again, it doesn't really help you. It drains your energy. So try as much as you can to keep your energy focused on the present. Catch yourself when you ruminate. So that said, it is fine and can be very helpful to do something called reflecting. And that's thoughtful review. Really, in a thoughtful, sort of cognitive way, what went well in the past? What can you learn? What can you do better next time? And what kind of insights can you draw from it? So reflect on it, get some learnings from it, and then move on. Take action. And identify what realistic actions, what can you do differently now because of that experience? And very importantly, what can you follow through with, and what will you follow through with? And at the bottom there, remember to breathe. I liked this saying from Corrie ten Boom. She's a Dutch author, and it really struck me when I read this. Worrying does not empty tomorrow of its troubles. It empties today of its strength. And that will help me and hopefully help you to catch yourself if you start to ruminate. Oh, I wanted to give you a story. Recently, I was ruminating and I caught myself. I was leading a group of people to march in a festival parade that just happened about 2 days ago on Sunday. And I worked for a couple months getting this ready. We're going to march in this parade, and I was getting disappointed because not too many people were signing up. And what we were doing was representing my local yoga studio. I'm on the board of directors, and I'm also a student in a couple of the yoga classes. And I really felt passionate about how important this yoga studio was in our little town of Stoughton, Wisconsin. And so I really wanted us to have a presence in the parade. And so I was so excited, and I got us all organized, and I got the banners and did the decorating. And then people weren't signing up, and I started to feel really worried about that. Like, how come more people aren't signing up? And then, of course, 2 or 3 days before the parade, after some sunny, warm weather, it starts to rain and the cold comes in. And the forecast, I'm checking it 3, 4, 5 times a day, like, oh, please don't let it rain. And I'm getting more and more anxious and worried about it. And so then on parade day, of course, it was sunny in the morning, and then an hour before the parade, it starts to downpour. And there's 4 of us, my 4 troopers, we're getting ready to march. We've got our signs. And here we are standing in the livestock barn, because we were at a fairgrounds, looking at the rain pouring outside, and I'm thinking, oh, why me? Why is this happening? And then I thought, you know what? I'm going to be doing a webinar about rumination and worrying and stress. And here I am doing this myself. And in like 1 minute, I just said to myself, let it go. It's going to be okay. It's like, don't get all hung up on this. And I felt myself physically going through a letting go. And suddenly I felt lighter, and I felt like it's going to be okay no matter what. And then wouldn't you know it, about 15 minutes before the parade started, the rain stopped. It was cool and breezy, but it was just fine. And so here's a picture of us marching in the parade with our banners for Stoughton Yoga. I'm the one here in the back waving to the crowd, and we just had an absolutely great time. So I had to catch myself. I was getting caught in that cycle of rumination, and it all ended up well. That's my little story about ruminating. And part of that I was also doing was this third aspect of reframing. How do I think about stress? And that's something to consider for yourself. Be aware of your default setting. Like, do you always go to the negative, or do you always try to find the glass half full? And just, again, don't blame yourself, but just know what your default tends to be and how it influences your own perception of stress. And if it's working for you, great. And if it's not, maybe you can think of some ways to help make it better for you. You can shift your focus from how can I use, from instead of being so overwhelmed, how can I use this energy of being overwhelmed to actually propel myself forward? Or cast your skills in a new light. If your skills seem to be bogging you down in a way, how can you transform them so that they can serve you better? Another thing you can do in reframing is to detach a bit. What that does not mean is to shut down. It doesn't mean shut down, and it doesn't mean go into total withdrawal. Detaching here means just help yourself maintain perspective. Maybe you need to zoom out a little bit from the context you're in. And then distinguish between things, a sense of worry and a sense of care. You can care without worrying. Think about that for a minute. So it doesn't mean stop caring. And then finally, you can link the difficulties you may be encountering with learning. Instead of asking yourself, why me, like I did, ask, what can I learn from this? Or what else might I be missing? And how can I benefit, and how can I help others benefit from this situation? So those are some of the more conceptual ways of dealing in the process of resilience. Now we get into the aspects of spiritual and emotional and physical, etc. So spiritual starts with a sense of purpose. To help yourself be resilient, understand what your purpose, either in this moment or even in a broader context. What's your personal why? What gives meaning to what you're doing now, and then overall meaning to your life and to your work? Find ways that adversity can actually connect you to your larger life purpose. Many of us have heard the story of Viktor Frankl when he was in the concentration camps. And, in spite of those horrible, dire circumstances he was in, he found, man's search for meaning is what he wrote later, but that he chose a purpose for what he could do in that moment, and kept himself rooted and grounded in that purpose in spite of the horrible adversity that he was facing. And hopefully most of us will never be in a situation as dire as that. But purpose and making meaning can really be powerful. Many of you have probably experienced that already, and if not, just remind yourself that that's always there for you, and to help yourself get clear on that. We'll have an exercise later in the webinar that can get you started on that path. Also, give yourself credit. You really do. We all have the resources within us right now to be more resilient. And if we're caught in the cycle of sacrifice and stress, we may forget and not realize that those resources for us are there. So remember that, and help yourself, maybe either through breath or through some of these other ways, to help you get more connected with your own resources. Clarify what you value. That's really important. We do this a lot in leadership development work, is to get clear on what your values are, and then see how much you can align your behaviors and your reality with your core values. And then creating balance. For those of us who have lost or ended a job, maybe prematurely, that we didn't expect to leave quite so soon. I know this happened to me. It was one of those good news, bad news things. But what I realized after leaving a job was I was so immersed in that career role for so long, I didn't even really know what to do with myself right away. Like, who am I? Because I had identified so strongly with being that role and serving in that capacity that it took a while to form an identity apart from that. And I realized that had actually been missing for me. So looking at your values, I've got another poll here for you. If you'd like to type in the chat space, you're welcome to do that. Looking at, this is a short list of 12 common values. On the CPG website, there's an exercise with many more. But if you look at these 12 words of values, which would you say might be in your 2 to 3 top values, at least at this moment in your life? What do you really value here? I'm going to pull this up here. Okay. So we've got integrity and challenge are coming in, and autonomy. So, and creativity. Yeah. So 4 top values there. So there's ways to weave your values together. If you took a challenge, value of wanting challenge and being creative and autonomous in that, you can certainly fulfill those 3 and do it in a high integrity way. You can really fulfill many of your values in any one endeavor. So if you picked a task or a challenge that you were a job that you had to do, you can think about, how can I do this with high integrity and challenge myself and optimize my autonomy and still be creative at that. Ways, thank you for that, and ways for you to be very clear about what are the values that matter most to you and honor those values, and then also recognizing that other people will have other values and that we can honor and understand and recognize those as well. Good, thank you. So moving on to the other aspects of resilience, there's the physical aspect. So this is literally your body, your physical health. We all know this. Sometimes we just need a gentle, friendly reminder, especially those of us with desk jobs. Remember, you need to move your body. You need to take breaks. Doesn't mean fidgeting, but move every 90 to 120 minutes. Keep your body, your circulation active and alert and moving. And then prioritize exercise. Choose something that you enjoy. That always helps. I know I'm enjoying right now my yoga classes, and I enjoy walking. Now that the horrible winter has gone from the Midwest, it's trying to go anyway. To go out and do some walking outside. I love that. And it's just fun, and it helps with fitness. Here we go with breathing again. Remember to use your breath. You can consciously control it and experiment with it. Use your breath when you need to calm. Use your breath when you need to relax, or even when you need to start energizing. You can do a lot with just breathing. Of course, there's nutrition. It needs to be balanced, variety and moderation. And so many of the articles, I think just about every single one that I read on resilience emphasized the need for good sleep. And it was about quantity and quality. So sleep being our built-in biological source of resilience, during which time our brain actually does a lot of work, storing and integrating the inputs that we had from the day. The average 7.5 to 8.5 hours. Some of you might need less, some of you might need more. But to really try to give yourself that good sleep time. And to do that, your sleep environment often does matter, where it's dark, cool, and quiet. And I emphasize disconnected. I've had the experience where I look at things on my smartphone, looking at YouTube clips, and having a really enjoyable time looking at some of the comedy clips from the week. And it's so easy to click just one more and click just one more. And next thing I know, 2 hours have gone by. And then I have found that if that ever happens, I usually don't sleep very well. It's not very deep or restful. And I think it has something to do with that screen time. And I think there's some articles on that too, that it does some stimulating to the brain right before you try to sleep. So as fun as it also isn't maybe as healthy, but it's still so tempting. Okay, and then there's the mental and intellectual aspect of resilience. We do sometimes get mentally fatigued, and that just happens. We feel exhausted, so know when that's happening and take a restorative break. That might mean that you zone in or link into your exercise there, taking a walk or some yoga or a little nap if you can. If maybe your work has a little nap room or not. If you work from home, there's always the couch. Or immerse yourself in some music that you just absolutely love, or find a hobby to just, one of your hobbies that you can distract yourself in for a little bit. That can help restore you and bring balance back to your brain. Practice controlling your attention. This is the mindfulness idea, consciously putting your attention where you want it, when you want it. And when it drifts and it goes off into, all these multitude of distractions, don't blame yourself, just pull yourself back to the focus. Just keep pulling back and pulling back to your focus in a gentle, inviting way, and just focus on that. And there again, you can use your breathing. And then remember to grow your mind, stretch your mind, get new perspectives, knowledge, skills. Your mind loves to learn, and let it learn, help it learn the things that you enjoy learning. Notice what stimulates your interest, and things might change over your lifetime. Something that interested you 15 years ago might not be so interesting now, but maybe something else does. And it's always just so fun to learn new things. Also notice when you feel resistant to learning, and what is that telling you? And one technique you might try is keeping a learning log or some kind of a journal. And what did I learn today, or what did I learn this week? Then there's the emotional aspect. We're all human, and so humans have emotions, and emotions are not good or bad, they just are. They're normal and natural of being human. So be aware of your emotions. You don't have to act on your emotions. You can just be aware of them and know what triggers you, maybe in good ways and maybe in bad ways. What are your triggers? The more you can be aware of that, the more you can manage yourself and take care of yourself. So take charge of your own growth and your own emotional state. Explore the power of positivity and optimism. Really don't downplay this. So we talked before about realistic optimism. And so yes, you can stay grounded in reality, but make an effort actually to show appreciation and gratitude and to feel hopeful as much as you can. And, and show love, genuine, and humor. The more you can genuinely activate those places in your brain, that's really healthy for you. Some people like to write in a gratitude journal, like what am I grateful for? I thought about this yesterday, and I thought when I was at the kitchen sink, I'm grateful for hot and cold running water. There's people in the world that don't have that, and I'm really grateful to have that. And then cultivating kindness by regularly doing something nice in an authentic way, something nice, and it can be small for someone else. Just offering them, opening the door for them, offering them, a tissue if they're sneezing. Just do something nice, and you'll see that it gets returned in kind. And then finally, managing your energy. Again, being aware of your actions and your reactions. To just do your best to be present, to maintain perspective, and practice those steps of reflection. Sometimes you need to step away or you need to slow down. Just give yourself that reminder. It's time to slow down. It's time for me to see what I'm doing and choose the response that I'm going to take. And then if you do start to ruminate, which you probably will from time to time, just ask yourself, does this help me, or will this help my family or my team if I'm doing this rumination? And then the final aspect of resilience is social and relational. And we've heard this and we know this, that relationships in our life are really important. So you need to work at it to nurture the relationships that are meaningful for you. And good, healthy relationships will help us with our goals, help us deal with hardships, and develop perspective. We need to seek out those people who will offer a good ear, a kind ear, and listen to us, or offer encouragement, or maybe even challenge us with some challenging thoughts, or provide some wisdom for us. So bottom line there is, do invest the time in important relationships. Ways to create meaningful relationships are to be authentic and give genuine feedback, positive feedback to someone. Let them know how you appreciate them, or share something you've recently learned, or ask them about their own experiences. And of course, then remember to listen using those great listening skills you learned a few webinars ago. You could even ask someone for input advice. And again, you need to listen if you do ask for that. And of course, remembering to breathe. Okay, so that was quite a deep dive on these aspects of resilience. And when you feel like you want to be more resilient, you can pick one or more of these, and each of us might have our own formula or recipe that matters most for us about which one or more of these we need to attend to in a particular moment. So you can figure that out for what works best for you. So we've looked here at this bridge of resilience, taking us from the sacrifice syndrome over to the renewal cycle. Now I'm going to spend just a little bit of time looking more deeply at the renewal cycle and this idea of resonance and the components therein. So resonance, a resonant relationship, and this comes from the work of Boyatzis and McKee. Resonance, being in tune with, it's like it in audiology, or in the science of sound. It's being in tune with or on the same wavelength as others. And the great leaders will move us through resonance. Leadership, again, it means in the broad terms, not just a job title. Someone with responsibility that interacts with other people. Someone who's resonant, they move us. And we can tell when someone has that going on for them. It's something that you really can feel. The leader's challenge then, when we ourselves are a leader and when we're working with other leaders, the challenge is to manage that cycle of sacrifice and renewal. I'm going to back up to that. We're never just always in one part or always in the other. It's a cycle, and it goes back and forth and around and around. So we just have to keep reminding ourselves when we do get over in the sacrifice part to muster up our resilient skills and get ourselves over into renewal. It's a dynamic process. So in the book even reinforces that being resilient is the way to help us manage that. The other ways of practicing resonance are through these ideas of mindfulness, hope, and compassion. And let's look at those briefly. Mindfulness. Well, we know this already. It's about being a state of being. It's when we're awake, when we're aware and attuned and attending to both ourselves and other people. So notice we have to keep ourselves in the equation. This isn't about self-neglect. And we're attending and aware of ourselves, like I said, and then to the world around us. That's just being mindful. And this idea of hope. We've talked also about optimism, finding ways to make the best of the situation that we're in with a dose of reality, but looking at it as optimistically as we can. The image of a better, feasible future, and the underlying belief that we can make it happen. And then compassion. It's a true, authentic experience of care, of concern, and empathy, which is understanding others' experience. It isn't feeling sorry for people, and it isn't giving up yourself. So compassion is compassion for yourself as well as for others. So there's kind of a fine line and a paradox there. You don't want to care so much about others that you're doing it at the expense of yourself. So you've got to keep both in the equation. But compassion really can go a long way because you really don't know what it's like in the other person's shoes. And if you can just show that you care enough to try to understand, even if you can't fully understand, just the act of trying to understand where someone is and accepting that can go such a long way. And I had two experiences with some managers that I worked for. One was very compassionate with me early in my career when my mother was terminally ill. And and I remember being afraid because I had just started a new role, and I was afraid to like not be at work, you know, that would let my workmates down, and that I'd be somehow doing something wrong. And my manager at that time said, you know, this is really important that you need to be with your mother. And that compassion just went such a long way for me. And I'll never forget that in him. And then fast forward many years later, different building, different role, different manager, who even in the context of some difficult corporate politics that were going on, he always had a sense of optimism, and he always kept a degree of humor. And it was humor that was based in reality. I mean, it wasn't frivolous. And he had this motto to just stop and smell the roses. And he really meant it. And he was always very grateful and showed appreciation for the work of his team. And I'll never forget that, because that fueled my motivation. And I wanted to just do a really good job because of that sense that he exuded. So those were a couple of managers that really made a difference for me. So what we know about great leaders in the terms of resonance is that they have strong emotional intelligence. And you can read more about that. There's a lot more online about what emotional intelligence is, you know, self-management and then relationship management. They inspire hope, vision. They spread compassion. They often show that they're mindful, and that they inspire others by creating this idea of resonance. So I'm going to try to wind it up now. I realize I'm getting close to time. And I'm going to share with you some questions that really, and exercises that come from this book called, it's a workbook called Becoming a Resonant Leader. It was written in 2008 or published then with Boyatzis, McKee, and Johnston. And so it's a really nice workbook with a lot of self-directed exercises. One of them is to just think back, like I just did, who were the people in your life and in your career, the people that helped you and that helped you develop the most, and that did things that really, you know, were helpful for you. And think about, what was it? What did they do? How did that make you feel? When you think about the ones that were so positive, and you have that memory of that feeling, you know, that was them being resonant with you. So that's one thing to start reflecting on. And then ask yourself, in the past or right now, are you a resonant leader? Have you been one before, and are you one now? And again, leader in your family, in your community, or of course, in your workplace or with your colleagues. Are you inspirational, and do you create the positive, hopeful, emotional tone? Are you experiencing and demonstrating compassion, being in touch with others, knowing what's on their hearts and minds? And again, in a realistic way. This isn't about being a bleeding heart. This is about just caring and authentically. And are you mindful, keeping yourself, others, and the environment all in your state of awareness? So that's one set of questions. So one exercise that's offered up in the book, and I was really delighted to see that Richard Boyatzis and some other authors have a new book coming out called Helping People Change, being published this year. I love this quote: "A person's vision is his or her image of a possible future. It's not a goal or a strategy. It's not about actions or obligations. It's neither a forecast of what's likely. In fact, instead, it's a dream." Some really powerful stuff there about just letting yourself and guiding yourself towards this dream of your personal vision. You know, take a break from that strong left brain for a while and think about things that you hope for, and using some optimism, things that you can dream of in the desired future. Doesn't mean it'll for sure happen, but what would you dream and desire based on what you consider your passions or your purpose, where you're at in your life, and what your values are, and what you consider your core identity to be. And that might take some work to kind of think about that for a bit. What would you describe as your ideal self? And from that, where would your personal vision take you? Some questions you can ask to help you. You can actually project out quite a ways, 7 to 10 years out. What will you be doing? Where will you be? Who will you be with? What will your work life and your life be? And who will I be? Just think about that. Of course, you don't know the exact answer, but think about in terms of dreaming what that could be like. All right, this was a lot of information, and thank you so much for hanging in there. What I tried to do was explore these ideas of reality, resilience, and resonance with you, with the idea towards recharging. And I just always like to leave you with an invitation to action. And that is, in all this information I downloaded about resilience and resonance, what parts of that sparked your interest, and why did that spark it? What would you like to do? I mean, would you like to do more about just helping yourself accept change and accept reality? Would you like to make commitments to stop ruminating or accept your emotions, or to get more physically active? What would you like to do? Take small steps. Small steps can make a really big difference. You don't try to eat the whole elephant at once, of course. And then make a commitment to yourself. When will you begin? What will you actually do? And how will it help you? And how will you feel when you're starting down that journey? Okay, so we've got a few minutes left for thoughts, questions, ideas. Feel free to raise your hand. And Perry, I'm going to ask you to kind of watch for this and see if we've got people that want to share here, or type in the chat box. And then just remember, there'll be handouts posted. So Perry, I'll turn it over to you for the last couple of minutes. Go ahead.
All right, so we'll just hang out a second. You can always email us after a webinar, or contact us through the website. So Bonnie, just as always, thank you very, very much for all of the hard work and thought you put into pulling off these webinars, and challenging us, laying out new concepts and challenging us to think differently about the worlds we're in and the impact that we have on other people on a day-to-day basis. So we really appreciate that. And so far, no questions or anything coming in. So we'll just respect everyone's time and go ahead and conclude the webinar. So thank you so much, Bonnie. And we'll look forward to having you back another time.
Thanks, Perry. My pleasure. I look forward to it.
Thanks. Have a good day, everybody.